Thanks for tuning in to the Lean 911 podcast, where you'll have a voice directly from the Gemba. I will rely on my 3 decades of Lean successes as well as my failures to answer your most challenging questions regarding your Lean transformation. I'm your host, Mark DeLuzio, President and CEO of Lean Horizons Consulting and the Principal Architect of the Danaher Business System. Looking forward to your questions. Now, let's go to the Gemba. Welcome to episode 36 of the Lean 911 podcast. Today, we are fortunate to have one of our managing directors from Lean Horizons Consulting, Kevin Mathis, who I've known for a very long time. Kevin, we're going to talk about mixed model production on episode 36. And just a little bit of background for Kevin. Kevin and I met at Danaher in I guess it was the late 80s.
But yeah,
And maybe early 90s. 1880s or in 1980s, Kevin? I can't remember.
yeah, 1980.
And Kevin was at the time a plant manager of one of our divisions called Hennessey down in Tennessee. And Kevin, before we even really got into really serious lean, figured out how to do mixed model production at the Hennessey plant. And he'll talk more about that. And I was intrigued by that, but we did a number of kaizens down at Hennessey and spent a lot of time down there. And in some sense, it was kind of like a proving ground for the development of the Danaher Business System. So Kevin played a big role in the Danaher Business System's creation. I would probably say we try to perfect our kaizen there almost as much as we did at Jake Break, where it all started, and made a lot of fine-tuning changes too. But anyway, Kevin was that guy, and then he got recruited out to a company called HNI or Han Office Furniture by George Konensaker, who really started. He and Art Burns started all this at Jake Break. George hired me in 1987, and when George left in the early 90s to go to Han, and he became president of Han, he recruited Kevin, and I could have killed George for taking Kevin, but but why not? I mean, why wouldn't you do that? And so anyway, so Kevin went on for a storied career there too. You were there for, I don't know, 20 some odd years, Kevin. How long was it?
Yeah, 20.
And yeah. And he started out, he was running all of the operations, VP of operations for all of Han. And then from there, he gravitated into a general management position with one of the divisions. So he's really well-rounded and also very well-schooled in the fundamentals. You know, we talk a lot about the fundamentals of lean, and we're big guys when it comes to basics, right? We don't, no fancy stuff. We think the basics work. Sometimes they're not sexy, sometimes they're hard, but they're supposed to be hard, and that's how we solve our problems. So when I saw Kevin did the first mixed model line in Danaher, I was intrigued by that. And we started looking about how he did that. And he's going to talk all about that today, okay, in terms of mixed model. I think we're going to answer a couple of questions. What is a mixed model production line? First of all, why would you do it? Why in the world would you do it? Boy, it's hard. Why are you going to do something that's hard? What are the benefits? And then some thoughts about implementation. And I don't know, Kevin, maybe depending on how time looks, we may have a follow-up on mixed model a little bit later to say, hey, look, maybe we need to get more graphic in terms of details on another podcast, on another episode. So this is episode 36. So Kevin, I'm going to turn it over to you. Did I miss anything about your bio besides being a good golfer and living up in Iowa right now and all that stuff? What did I miss?
The only thing I would probably add is that from my lean journey is I'm an industrial engineer by training. So went to school, learned about that, spent some time doing, I guess, more traditional industrial engineering stuff before I got introduced to lean and Shinkajitsu and the Danaher Business System and those things. And it just became, really just fell in love with trying to learn the process, right? And get back to basics and eliminate waste and make things better for people. And that's how I kind of just jumped right in. So
Kevin, I won't hold your IE background against you. if you don't hold my finance background against me.
Yeah, I won't do that. I won't do that. I think, when I was in college, no one ever heard of lean, right? Or
Right,
employee action
right,
system or any of those kinds of things. And so, we learned time studies and, things like that. But
sure.
it was very highly frustrating because, the Kaizen process makes things happen, right? And it helps you get out on the shop floor and out to Gemba to learn and see. And traditional industrial engineering didn't do it the same way. And
Kevin, that just reminded
uh,
me. You and I should probably do a follow-up episode on the difference between traditional industrial engineering studies and standardized work.
for sure.
That's a big
But,
deal. And let me tell you, I've been in some arguments with some lean professionals who came out of companies like Nissan, for example, and they argue that the traditional IE is no different than standard work, time observations, and all that, and it is so different. Okay, but
mhm, mhm,
maybe a thought for another day. We can actually probably do a really good episode on that one, and hope
sure,
clarify because the question comes up all the time. You know,
sure.
things like,
Yeah,
how do you allow for fatigue?
yeah,
You don't. If your operation is giving you your operator's fatigue, it's a bad process. You got to
mhm,
fix it. You can't
mhm,
allow that, right? Anyway, um, make it ugly really is what we want to do at standard work so that we understand the problems and we attack them. So anyway, um, yeah, that's a good one. We'll put that down as a future episode.
sure, yeah, yeah.
So Kevin, why don't you go right into a mixed model? What the heck is a mixed model production line anyway?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. From our viewpoint, where we were, back, in that time and working through that, if you think about the line and the product line, and we made, tire changers and wheel balancers and alignment equipment and brake lathes and different equipment that, shops would use to service cars, right? And the particular line we're talking about today was tire changers, right? And they take the tire and they break the bead and they take it off the rim so it doesn't damage your nice aluminum rims, and then they put a new tire back on, and it's a machine that does all that work, right? And there's several different variations and different models with different kinds of features, for that, right? So say there's 5 different models of that. Well, we might, in mixed model production, we might like make 3 of item 1, 4 of item 4, 2 of item 2, 1 of item 5, and then repeat that cycle as we do that closer to customer demand, right? So what's the customer demand look like? And that's how we decided what that mix was. But a mixed model would be really mixing that production, so we don't just make all of ones and then someday make all of twos and then someday make all of threes and so forth. And that's how we thought about mixed model.
So what you're saying here is that, and I've seen this pretty much universally, and so have you, Kevin, as you travel around the world. The way companies decide to manufacture is most of the time not in concert with the way customers order and consume.
Correct, for
So
sure.
what you're trying to
Yep.
do with mixed model is match your production schedule, if you will, as close as possible to the way customers are ordering your product.
Correct, correct. And I think that, the one of the things that we looked at, and the reason we even looked at was, first of all, is there's a business need for us to do that. We
Sure.
were Volume was growing, and we don't do Kaizen just to do Kaizen. We do Kaizen to achieve, better business results, right? And better results for people. We had a business need. Volume was growing. We were trying to move more production into the facility. We're running out of warehouse space. There's a lot of different reasons that cause us to say, well, why are we doing this the way we're doing it? And how do we think about doing it better? And one, free up floor space. Two, take better care of customers. And three, drive, better safety, quality, delivery, and costs, right? So that's the business need that caused us even to really, at that point, think about it, because we didn't know what we didn't know about, how to get that done and why to get that done.
Well, when you say cost too, on the safety, quality, delivery, and cost hierarchy, because it is a hierarchy,
Yep, yep.
each one being more important than the other below it. Um, I usually like to put inventory in there, Kevin, in the cost category, right?
Mhm,
And although inventory does have a direct impact on lead time, which affects delivery, your exposure to larger inventory means that you have exposure to bad quality, which affects
mhm.
quality, so forth and so on. Um, so as you look at as you look at the the inventory impact, what did that do to your inventory when you're making your your production schedule closer to the demand forecast or the demand your orders?
Yeah, so I think about a couple of things, and we'll talk about. I think we should talk about how we figure out the demand and the mix and all that as
Hmm.
we go forward here. But one is we were able then to mix the production very close to the trucking schedule, which was the delivery schedule to our customers, right?
Sure.
And so what we saw was that inventory of finished goods drastically reduced, right? From weeks to days worth of inventory because we were able
Wow.
to do that. What we didn't see, what we didn't understand what happened that happened was that inventory throughout the whole production facility turned much faster because the driving mixed model production and dealing with the variation caused us to have to improve every single operation that supported that line. We had to set up things faster. We had to improve quality because we had space for defects. We had to improve workstations. Every single thing across that facility drove inventory to go through the process faster.
A lot of what we talk about, Kevin, is a Venn diagram, right? You really can't talk about mixed model without talking about standard work or setup or lean accounting for that matter,
Mhm,
because taking down your inventory the way you did had a drastic profit and loss impact to the bottom line, a bad impact because
mhm,
you're not capitalizing your cost back into inventory anymore. And although that's a very temporary thing, but your cash flow is really what you have to look at.
mhm, mhm,
Um, and that's the most important thing for any business. I don't care who you are.
mhm.
Accounting profits don't always tell the tale of the tape in terms of, how well you're performing. But a subject for another day. But let me throw a thing out to you. And by the way, when you said you had to improve all the other sub assemblies and fabrication, everything else that you had going on, that's only that would only be true if you didn't have pull systems between your final assembly line and all those other sub departments that were feeding that line. I mean, if you're
Correct,
right, I
correct,
mean, if you were scheduling those areas in a traditional MRP batch and queue environment, it wouldn't matter. You wouldn't have seen the impact. So your pull signals to those lines were critical, I would imagine.
correct. Plus, I think the other thing was as we continued to kaizen that process, what we realized was that there were areas that we could dedicate into the flow better by building different machines or thinking
Sure.
about the processes differently, where we didn't need as many pull systems because we were just including them in the line. But you quickly find out that if you don't have the right pull systems and the ability to do that, you just overwhelm your system. So it forces you very quickly to go back and say, how am I going to do this? How do I drive that responsiveness that I need to the customer, right? And that
You
drives
know,
you to implement pull systems and drive setup reduction, quality improvement, standard work development, and really helps makes you think through all those things and attack them one by one.
Kevin just indicated earlier a principle called safety, quality, delivery, and cost. And I've spoken about that on other
Mhm,
episodes in this podcast. But another principle to keep in mind is the concept of flow versus the concept of pull and push. Of
mhm,
course, we never want to push. That's all batch and queue, push inventory production, which is against the just-in-time principle, right? and some other principles as well. But Kevin just got through saying here, okay, well, my interpretation of what you just said was, if I don't have to pull it, that's even better because then I don't have to manage it. I don't have
Right,
to manage
exactly.
Kanban cards and pull systems. So what did he say? He said, we incorporated some of the sub-assemblies into the assembly line, the final assembly line, where now those things are being flowed. They're flowing instead of having to be pulled. I don't have to
Mhm,
manage a pull system. I don't have to manage a Kanban inventory. I don't have to worry about cards getting lost or water spider timing and their pitch to the line and all that. If I take a sub-assembly and incorporate it into the fabric of the assembly cell, the final assembly cell, then it's now flowing. And I
mhm,
remember Nakao telling us, Kevin, our sensei that you worked with, Chihiro Nakao, he told me, Kanban, no good. He goes,
mhm,
why do Americans like Kanban? By the way,
mhm.
another subject for another episode.
Right,
But
yeah, we
why
could
do
talk about
Americans
that
like
too.
Kanban? He said, everybody, he said, flow first, pull where you can't flow. And
Mhm,
that pull is the Kanban he's talking about.
right.
Never ever push. So he
Yeah.
says, you for sure ask, where can I flow?
Well, what Nicole taught me was that pull is a result of your failure to make it flow.
Yeah,
And and
yep, yep.
and as we first were implementing this process this process, um, Sensei Nakao was one of our coaches and mentors helping us. And he took me out into the shop floor and he very eloquently demonstrated that to me. I'll just put it that way.
Well, Nakal wasn't
Important to
eloquent. I
understand.
know I've been fired by him several times in a single day.
Right,
Um,
right, for
but
sure.
what he taught us the same thing, Kevin. Kanban is a mission of failure to do one piece flow.
Mhm. Yep.
And Americans, I just listened to a podcast the other day on Kanban, and they were just, treating Kanban as if it's a holy grail.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they got all these great savings from Kanban. I was like, okay. Um, Never ever did this podcast episode that I was listening to mention anything about flow,
Mhm,
you know.
mhm,
Let me
mhm.
throw another pushback that I get all the time on mixed model.
Okay.
Mark, you don't understand. We've got to make all part A this week because our changeovers are way too long. You want to what? You want us
Mhm,
to do more changeovers? When
mhm,
Nakao told us that, by the way, in Iwata, when they both told us you have to do more changeovers, we looked at them like they had three heads.
mhm,
Like, what are you crazy? We're trying to avoid changeovers. Don't you know
mhm,
EOQ and
mhm.
Ollie White MRP?
Sure, sure,
And
yeah.
so, how do you respond to that? If I said to you, you said, "Hey, Mark, you need to do a mixed model," and Kevin, do you know what our changeovers are like? There's no
Mhm,
freaking way we're going to do that, man. Our changeovers would kill us. It would
mhm.
kill our productivity. Okay, yeah. Well, how would
Yeah,
you
yeah,
respond to that?
I think that's a very traditional way of thinking about it, right? But our training has taught us to think about how can we do it, not how can't we do it, right? And to flip the question the other way. And so I think in this case, you know, changeovers did kill us, right? And but what we learned was, you can't take it as a premise that it has to be that way, right?
Yeah,
if
yeah,
you if you study it and you look at it and you apply the principles of value added and non-value added and you eliminate the non-value added work and then you start working on making the value added work better and you develop standard work and you start doing those things, you can take every setup down to near zero. I mean, I think that that thing is 10 minutes or something, but we found ways to continue to drive setup down to where it wasn't the bottleneck, right? But you can't start with the premise of we can't do it, right?
you know how
Have
odd that
to flip
sounds
the
to
question
somebody.
over.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
know how odd that sounds to somebody that is very traditional
yeah,
in
yeah.
manufacturing. You want me to do more sets? What are you nuts?
Mhm,
And and you're right because I think the knee jerk reaction always is, let me tell you why we can't do it. Initially, I want to
mhm,
tell you that right
mhm.
away,
Yep.
without changing that mindset, right? And saying how can we do it? I was working with a company that made thermoform products. The little plastic trays that go into like candy
Mhm, mhm.
boxes of
Sure.
candy.
Yep. Yep.
This one particular press had 12 parts on it. Okay. And what they were doing is they were making part A, or let's say call it part number one, uh, in the first week. On weekend, they'd change over and they'd run it the next week for part number two, change over part number three the next week, and so forth. So all 12 parts got produced that way. And regardless of the demand, because not all of those part numbers had the same demand, they would just run it out. And they were turning inventory like zero point 0.8 times a year. Okay, they're like 6 months of inventory
Mhm.
plus. But they were quoting 7-week lead times.
Mhm.
So I got in front of the whole management team and operators and middle management. I said, if you guys have 6+ months worth of inventory, how is it that you're quoting 7-week lead time? Okay. And everybody was silent except for one
Mhm.
lady. She was an operator. She raised her hand. I give her a lot of credit because we're making the wrong stuff.
Mhm. Yeah.
And remember what Ono said. Tashi Ono had a quote. He said, the more inventory you have, the less likely you have what you need.
Yep.
Okay. That's
That's
pretty,
very true.
pretty
Yep.
insightful, right?
Mhm.
And so we got into changes. So we actually took their changeover time down by about 85% in 3 days. Okay.
Mhm.
I got a model, which I'd be happy to send to anybody if they want it. We'll give you our email at the end of this thing. And I calculated that they can now make all 12 part numbers every 1.2 days. And
Mhm.
with a
Mhm.
little bit more work, you do it in one shift. Okay.
Mhm.
Because that was just our initial, kaizen. And they all said to me, "You mean we got to change over 12 times every day?" I go, "Yeah."
Mhm.
It's, it's simple now, right?
Mhm.
And and they couldn't understand why.
Mhm.
So I always like to go outside of manufacturing, Kevin, and give an example of, everyday life and say, well, okay, um, how many people here have ever had a barbecue in their backyard? And they all raise their hand, right? So let's just
Mhm.
say you're making hot dogs and hamburgers.
Mhm.
You got about 15, 20 guests, friends, family, relatives. Um, I said, how many people just make the hamburgers first? And nobody raised their hand. Okay, then
Mhm.
that must mean you all make the hot dogs first. Nobody
Mhm.
raised their hand. How many people put hot dogs and hamburgers on the grill at the same time? And they all raised their hand,
Right.
right?
Sure.
Why do you do that? Well, we want everybody to eat together. Not everybody is going to want hot dogs, or not everybody's going to want hamburgers. And I said, well, me, I'd want both, but okay, I'm an oddball. But
Mhm.
okay, so you're getting demand from your guests for hot dogs and hamburgers at the same time.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
okay. Now, hand me one of your sales orders. They handed me a sales order and had 8 part numbers on it, 8
Yep.
of the 12. There's only one due date on here that they want this stuff by. How are they going to get it if part number one you're making in the first week, part number 8 you're making in the eighth week? How are they going to get it by this due date? Don't you see now why you're quoting 7 weeks lead time? Don't you see now why customers are going somewhere else because they don't want to do business with your lead
Mhm.
time?
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
And so in a sense, that one machine, you can almost argue that was mixed model. But to your point, though, when you said we're doing 3 of A and 2 of B and 1 of C, you're matching that to the relative weight of the demand,
Correct.
and no longer can they just make whatever they wanted for each one of these part numbers. A little bit of forecasting and all that. So I'm leading this conversation into, what about the demand management side of this, Kevin? How did you come up with that sequence
Mhm.
of, 4 of these, 3 of these, 2 of these, 4 of these, 3 of these, 2 of these? How did you
Mhm.
come up with that sequence? What was the thinking behind that?
Yeah, yeah. So I think there's a couple different things we had to think about. One was, and you know this, anytime you ask a customer what's their demand, or we're in with the client, we ask what their demand, they can't figure it out, right? But one was we had to look at the macro picture of what's the demand for product on that line over time, right? And
Right.
we have to look backwards a bit and forwards a bit for capacity to get, this is we need 1,000 a day or whatever the right number was a day for this period of time. And how do we think about that? Then we had to go in closer to, so that gives us a broad view of for this month or so, we need 1,000 a day. And we had a process where we kept updating that every single week in a demand planning process of what's the macro. the micro of, well, what am I going to do today and tomorrow and the next day? And as we think about that, we had a view of what's the real customer orders coming in right now, and what's and for us, we were tuning into our ship model of how are we going to get those delivered to the customer when they want them, and trying to build it in a sequence that allowed us to hit as close as possible to that process with which we were going to deliver them to our customer. So we had
Right.
this macro view of we're gonna be targeting around 1,000 a day. I'm just making up a number, but we had a macro view of that. Within that, then as we zeroed into the day, what's this days and this week's shipping schedule look like for what the real customer demand is, and mix within that 1,000 a day, so that we could then mix the line to do that. And we tried to then balance that across a week's time of every day is going to be 4 of these, 5 of these as we started. And we kept getting closer and closer to mix that more on a daily basis. And that allowed us then to think about then how to balance the line and the fabrication areas and such to meet that customer demand. But there's really
So,
two levels we had to think about.
so one of the things I've done in a mixed model, I'm curious if you did this. And by the way, did you freeze that sequence over a certain time horizon?
We freeze it for a week. Every Thursday,
1 week.
we
Okay.
froze it for the next week.
Okay.
So we could align any other materials that we had to purchase or whatever that
Got
was.
it. So we might have to have another episode on this. But one of the things is how does that all work with standardized work? Because
Mhm,
if I took your 1,000 and struck a tack time, let's say,
mhm,
I'm sure that each one of these models had varying cycle times in terms of operator cycle time,
mhm,
uh, maybe even machine time. I don't know. But um, so now you say to yourself, well, then, geez, how do I do that? Now, the way I thought about it and the way I've done it in the past is I would write my standard work for every sequence, 3 A's, 2 B's, 1 C,
mhm,
and then take that. How many sequences do I need to do to get my 1,000? Use that as my denominator for the tack time. So in other words, the
mhm,
tack time now is based on sequence, and I would, from an operator perspective, think about those 7 or 8 products in that sequence as one big bill of material,
mhm, mhm.
and then write my
Yeah,
standard work that way.
yeah.
Is that an approach that you guys took?
No. Yeah, yes and no, I'll say. One is as we got into it, what we ended up doing, and what Sensei Nakao taught us was the line flowed at tack time. So if the tack time was every 30 seconds, a unit came off every 30 seconds. And we balanced the work at the workstations to every 30 seconds of standard work as close as we could to tack. So we balanced the work to tack time. The variations we took offline and had water striders that went around and not only filled parts, but would also do some minor sequencing to allow us to balance the line at the 30 seconds to keep the line flowing at tack
Ah, I
time.
see. I
So
see.
the variation was pushed off. So maybe on Model A, the water strider to put a bolt in one part to help us balance the line, or had to snap 2 parts together and feed that
I
to
see.
the line that ran at tack time. And that allowed us to keep every 30 seconds a unit came off, no matter if it was model A, B, C, or D, or whatever. Every
Okay.
30 seconds a unit came off. And eventually we were able to pace that line, which is probably another podcast to talk about the benefits of pacing the line. Um, but the variation was pushed back so that we could then staff around that variation, because in our case, as we eliminated the waste in that, we were able to standardize the way we dealt with that variation across the different workstations.
So, so
But
the, so
always
the
running attack time.
so the operator, work, the operator cycle time, no matter what the unit, A, B, C, or D, was always the same, and anything above that that was uh, uh, not ordinary, if you will, was pushed off to like a water spider to do that extracurricular work. So they can always count on the fact that the cycle time you assigned to the line itself, the main assembly line, was always going to be congruent with each other. All the parts would be the
Correct,
same.
correct. Yep,
Okay, that makes a lot of
correct,
sense. So
correct.
okay, that's cool.
Right.
Um,
And what that gave us too was, I think, as you think about safety, quality, delivery, and costs, and
right.
we should talk about respect for people too. What that allowed us to do was improve safety, quality, and delivery because one, we could make the workstations consistent, safe, deal with those. We could deal with any quality issues. We could count on getting something out for every 30 seconds, in this case, to tack time. But we also then didn't overburden any of the workers and assemblers on, say, model B comes along and it takes 10 seconds overtime time, and model C comes along, it's 10 seconds under. It allowed us to work with them to really get them in a position to really be engaged and drive safety and quality, because it was consistent, right? We took the
Yeah,
variation
yeah,
out for them.
yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Now, speaking of variation, how about a couple comments on product design? When I've been many times to Toyota in Japan, and I would see a Camry, a white Camry, and a blue Lexus, and a green Avalon right in line with each other.
Mhm. Yeah.
And a lot of people go to Toyota and they're marveled at their production, which, by the way, there's a lot to marvel at
Mhm.
because, as you and I know, we both consider Toyota, I believe, the probably the best manufacturing company in the world today.
Mhm. Mhm.
And Danaher was good, but we were never anywhere near Toyota,
Mhm. Mhm.
never.
Sure.
Okay, and they
Yeah.
probably still are not. All right.
Yeah.
Uh, However, our business system was where the power was. Anyway, as I looked at that, you could say, well, how do they do that? But then you start looking at the new product design.
Mhm.
Putting
Mhm.
together a Camry and an Avalon isn't all that much different from an operator work sequence. A lot
Correct.
of standardized components, a lot of standardized processes, right? Talk about that in the integration and the importance of integrating new product design as it relates to being successful in a model line.
Yeah. I think that companies that have really involved in that process really understand that, and unfortunately, when we implemented, the mixed model that we're talking about, we didn't have that benefit, right? We had, the benefit of products that were designed by different engineers with the thought of building them in big batches and things like that that we had to overcome, right? Um,
You had legacy
but
products that you had to deal
yeah,
with.
right. But
Yeah,
if you think about, and I know you did a podcast, one that's upcoming on, the 3P process,
right,
process development and those. But if you think about designing your product so that it can be made that way, right? It helps you from the get-go. You're always going to want to drive continuous improvement and drive to make work better and safer and quality better and all those things. But product design is a huge driver in your ability to implement these things with improved quality, reduce changeovers, reduce inventory, improve flow. Product
right.
design is really a foundational thing, right? When we're talking about kaizen and doing this, we're after the fact, right? We're doing it in hindsight and trying to drive improvement on what's already been implemented, right? If I think about product design and product implementation, I want to think about these things up front, right? And do my planning up front on integrating the design that the customer needs, but also doing it in a way that facilitates producing it at the safest way with the best quality and the best delivery and therefore the best cost. So I think that, you know, work up front is way more efficient and significantly better than work on the backside.
Yeah, so I read a lot of literature on this, and my personal experience with this as well is that at least 70% of your product cost is already baked in once it hits job one because in the design, right?
Hmm.
And so now what you're alluding to here is when I do kaizen, I'm messing around with the 30%.
Yep, exactly.
That's
Yep.
what I'm working on. Unless I
Yeah.
go back and
Yeah.
redesign not only my product, but my process too to accommodate that. So
Exactly.
yeah,
You said it a lot more eloquently than I did, but exactly, right? Is I'm, it's a, product design is a leading indicator, not a trailing indicator, right? So how we think about that up front is going to greatly influence our ability to take care of our customers and have good quality and good delivery and good cost.
Kevin, you and I and other members of Lean Horizons, we're still scratching our heads. And this just happened to me the other day with a very large, I won't say who it was, but a multi-billion dollar uh, company that makes pretty high technical products, right? And the question was, how do we get product design and manufacturing to talk to each other?
Hmm.
Okay. And, they got their silos and their functions and everything else. And everybody thinks that there's a magic bullet with lean
Hmm. Hmm.
that it's going to give you all these answers.
Hmm.
And I told this person, this vice president, I told him, what we did and how we handled that, but from an organizational perspective, how we did that, how we incentivize people. But I'm like, here we are in 2024 talking about stuff that we talked about back in the 80s.
Yeah, yeah,
And it almost like did everybody go into a time warp
yeah.
and just, it's like you go into a coma and then 30 years later you wake up. All of a sudden you got the internet. All of a sudden you got smartphones. All of a sudden you got
Hmm.
satellite,
Hmm.
and it's almost like they did that. And it's like, where were these guys? And these are smart
Right,
people, by the way. These are not,
right.
these are high end, top people that are asking these fundamental, basic questions.
Hmm. Hmm.
And it's mind boggling to me.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's interesting as as you said, place after place we go, you see this, um, but they never get in the room. And I think another plug for your 3P podcast, but they never get in the room and really think about what's the function really need for it to be for the customer. What's the easiest way, best way to produce this thing, and how do I design all that up front before I implement and do my work up front, and then implementation is faster and easier,
And do it together.
and,
Do
and
it
I right,
together.
and I don't have to go back and fix all the problems that I get by just throwing these designs over the wall or not talking and communicating and practicing and testing and using scientific methods to figure out how to make this thing.
Yeah, yeah. And again, that could be another episode, in
For
terms of
sure.
how do you structure yourself to win in a new product design? I mean,
For
even as a
sure.
finance guy, and I'm not an engineer, right?
Hmm.
But even as a finance guy, when I was CFO of Jake Brake for George Koenigsegger, I remember looking at a design because we had fully integrated design teams. We had my finance guys were on the teams, and they stayed together throughout the whole design process. And what
Hmm.
happened was, depending on where you were in our toll gate process, if it was heavier on design, the design guy would take the lead of the team. When it moved into the operations, the manufacturing person would take the lead, but they all stayed together. They all had to
Hmm.
stay had to go to the same meetings. They all had to work together and collaborate and all that. And I remember one time we had a new product that we were developing at Jake Brake. And if you don't know what a Jake Brake is, it's a device that goes onto a heavy duty engine. And to make the math easy here, it when the driver takes his foot off the exhaust, it holds open the exhaust valve on the and turns the engine into an air compressor. So you'll hear that on the highway when these engines start making this really loud noise. That's the Jake brake engaging. Well, the Jake brake is a big hunk of gray iron or compact graphic uh, graphite, and we drill a bunch of holes in it and air passages and all this, and we have pistons and cylinders and control valves and solenoids in
Mhm,
this thing.
mhm,
Well, one of these designs had almost 100% of our deep holes. When I say deep holes, our bores for our master pistons and what have you, slave pistons, were all vertical. This one particular design happened to put, I think it was a master piston on the horizontal axis. So I went back to design and said, hey, by the way, it's going to cost us a couple $100,000 a piece of equipment just to get this one hole. Okay.
mhm,
Is
mhm.
there any way you
Sure.
guys can redesign this so that the master piston comes in from the top instead of the side? And 3 days later, they came up with a design and
Mhm,
they changed
mhm,
it. Okay.
mhm,
Um, and saved a couple $100,000 of capital. And so I
mhm.
got that operation for free, basically. You
Nice.
know, it's just little things and that's a simple example, right? Um, but it doesn't, if you really think through the whole process, it could really help you, you know.
Right.
So
And how many times in that conversation you go back to the engineer and they say, nope, can't do it, not gonna do it, and think that they know without really thinking through all the implications of their decision.
and the crazy thing about this one, they had the real estate on the top to be able to do it too. It wasn't
Yeah,
like
right.
it wasn't like, but they also knew that I don't take no for an answer. So well,
Well,
actually the guy that I went to, a guy named Zdenek Meistrick was a fabulous engineer.
yeah.
Z, and he's also a good friend of mine. And, and I went to him and said, Z, what's going on, man? What's going on
Mhm,
here?
mhm,
It was
mhm.
one of his guys that did it. And he said, I'll take care of this. He says. So,
Right,
uh,
right.
but anyway, but
But when
again,
you sit back at a Toyota plant and you watch the line run, what you can see is that they've thought through how they're going to manufacture it within their system before that design is finalized and pushed out to production, right? It's a great opportunity to stand and watch, and you can learn a lot by just observing, and it's really a fascinating study of what can be done.
that's a Yogi Berra line, by the way, who I saw play in an old timers
Yeah.
game.
Oh, really?
You can
Yeah.
observe a lot just by watching, he said.
Yeah, well,
And
Sensei Nakao once drew a circle on the floor for me,
oh yeah.
and he told me, he wanted me to stand in the circle for a whole day. Well, I stood there for about 4 hours, but you know, what he told me was you can see a lot just by looking. Is essentially what he told me, and he's right.
Well, again, we called that the Ono circle because
Mhm,
Ono did that to Nakao in
mhm,
Iwata.
mhm. Yeah,
And the thing about it is everybody says, "Oh yeah, I'm on the shop floor all the time. I'm engaged." When you walk through a factory, you don't see anything.
no,
You're just
exactly.
walking through. You got something on your mind. You're not really.
Mhm. Yeah.
And these Gemba walks that everybody champions, and nobody's afraid to say that they're a big waste of time. Most of them anyway. You
Mhm.
don't really know what's going on out there. What
Right.
you're getting is 6 or 7 dog and pony shows every morning, and you're not really seeing what's going on. I'd rather have an executive stand out there just like you did, and I've done the same thing, by the way,
Mhm.
and just stand there and watch. And
Yeah.
not only do
Yeah.
you end up watching with your eyes, you can
Mhm.
hear when things go different, wrong. You feel, you smell, and when I say feel, you can really feel the tact image
Mhm.
of the company, of the factory, or lack thereof, right?
Yeah,
Um,
right.
and so
Yeah,
that it,
perfect.
and
Yeah.
I did just to deviate here. I had a customer. Matter of fact, it was here in Phoenix, and they had a product that they would have to manufacture a sheet metal type of like a box, and on the box was an electronic control, and electronics were failing,
Hmm.
and especially when they got out to the field. So I took the president and I had her stand in the Ono circle to watch the assembly. Okay, what was happening is that the doors were not fitting the box very well. Now the doors of this box had the electronic device already in it.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like I was taking a rubber mallet and banging the crap out of the door just so it would fit
Hmm.
the box.
Hmm.
So I looked at her and I said, "Now, do you understand why you have quality problems on your electronics?"
Hmm.
You know.
Hmm.
Or,
Yeah, for
anyway, I
sure.
didn't jump to that conclusion, but I said that's a very good possibility why.
Right,
Okay.
right.
Just by
Exactly.
standing there watching it. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's what you
So
don't see when you just walk through.
Yeah, yeah, and so executives are usually too busy, they say, to do that kind of stuff, you know.
Yep, yep.
But profess that they have all the answers. With
Exactly.
problem escalation, I have an episode on
Right,
that. At problem
right,
escalation, like,
yeah,
why don't you come down
right,
to where the problem is? Why are we escalating to your third floor, right?
right, right.
Anyway,
That's another question.
well, Kevin, you talked a lot about the benefits on SQDC. Are there anything else you want to say about mixed model before we move on? Because I think maybe the implementation side of this thing, we can get more detailed on, and maybe we do another episode down the line.
Mhm,
Maybe the episode is going to be called "How do you implement mixed model?"
mhm.
And
Sure,
there's
sure.
a lot of
Uh,
things to consider.
don't only other thing that maybe we didn't talk about that I was surprised about in the process and and you know the first one that I was engaged with was at Danaher, and we did some others later on
Right.
and Han and things like that. But the thing that surprised me was at first as we're talking to our production people and the people that are running the line and materials people and all that. And at first, everyone is sort of like, what's going on? How can this be? And it has all the reasons why you can't do it. And, we just keep plugging away. But what we saw as we often see in the kaizen and continuous improvement process is a flip switched with the people that were involved in the process, and they became much more engaged and excited about how can I make this happen? How can we do this? How can we make the work better? Got it involved in participating in kaizens, participating in setup production, helping get engaged around the standard work, coming up with ideas to drive improvements to our process. We saw the level of employee engagement and satisfaction and just outlook and kind of their daily work take a huge leap forward. And part of that's because of the mixed model production and being more engaging and not having to do the same thing over and over and over again and seeing the changes and that. But part of that is the process of engaging them and the kaizen process and the continuous improvement process and the implementation model. And I don't think that that can be understood. How much improvement that was within that employee. I don't know if you want to call it morale or engagement process, whatever that right word might be. I don't think you can understate that. Or, that was a huge benefit that we saw that we didn't really anticipate as we were working through the process so much, and enough
I
that
have
really stood out.
I have a chart that shows exactly what you said, and it had to do with measuring employees' attitudes towards customers, each other, leadership,
Hmm.
the whole thing, the
Hmm.
company. And it goes up exponentially the more Kaizens they're involved in.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's incredible, you know,
Yeah.
I face a lot of companies right now who set up lean offices and at their factories or at their office or whatever, they have uh, these continuous improvement people who think that it's their job to come up with all the answers.
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay. And
Hmm.
now you and I, for example, Kevin, can go into a client and come up with the most elegant, perfect answer, if there's
Hmm.
such a thing. Let's just say there is.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah,
It's going to be rejected because we didn't involve them.
exactly. Yeah.
And if we really do believe that the best problems are solved at the lowest possible level, where where the work gets done, and that our employees who do the work are our best consultants, how is it that these people come in, come up with ideas, and then tell their people to implement their ideas?
Yeah.
It just doesn't work.
Hmm. Hmm.
And you're
Yeah.
absolutely right. You just created an environment where people want to come to work and give you their input.
Right. Right. We had a business need. They understood the business need, and then how we were able to engage them in that process really drove that. they were the engine that made it all happen. There's no doubt
Now, I
about
got
it.
a really important question for you. Did you guys have a no layoff policy as it relates to lean improvements?
For sure. Yep. Yep. That's
That's
a
another thing that people are
that's a
not
must
willing to
have,
commit
right?
to.
That's a
Yeah,
must have. That's a must have.
it's a must-have.
Yeah. You just you cannot expect employees to help you drive improvements and then watch their friends get laid off. They're just not going to
For
do
them.
it, right?
Yeah,
Right. And they're going to be watching over their shoulder the whole time. But um, so you just can't do that.
I've seen companies who measure employee engagement, but are not willing to make that
Mhm.
commitment.
Yeah. They'll
Okay,
never be
and
successful. Yeah.
no, 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 and it's I don't think you need a PhD in management from Wharton to to uh, to to understand this. This is just basic
Mhm.
street smarts 101.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I don't understand that. But anyway, no, this is good. So all right,
I
I tell you
think
what.
I think
Okay, Kevin.
those are misguided, right? They don't have safety, quality, delivery, and cost prioritized in in that order, right? They're thinking cost, 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 right? And if you're thinking about all those things and respect for people, then you always make the right decision.
Well, I think everything that you said today says that if you do all the right things in that regard, cost takes care of itself.
Exactly. Yep.
You know, I mean,
Exactly.
that to me is a lagging indicator, which is kind of like
Mhm.
a byproduct of just doing the right thing. And
Right.
people
Right.
want to manage costs, and I've made statements to CEOs that said you cannot cost cut your way to prosperity.
Yeah. That's so true.
You can't. You can't. You can't.
Although we
Never seen it
see a
done.
lot of people try to do it, it just it's very short-term thinking.
Well, there's companies out there right now who, and I just did an episode on this not too long ago about lean leadership and um, they these companies have these massive layoffs. There was one just recently cut 5% of their. It's a multi-billion-dollar company cut 5% of their workforce, and that to me, if I think about defining a defect, is a defect in leadership. To get yourself in a position like that where you have to lay off 5% of your people,
Mhm.
which is thousands of people, by the way.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and the thing that always bothered me was how come those that created the business environment that forced those layoffs get to keep their jobs?
Yeah. That's an interesting question, isn't it?
How come they're not the ones being laid off?
Yeah. It's an
You
interesting
know?
question.
Okay, so anyway, that's another subject for another day, but I did talk
Yeah.
about that on another
Yeah.
episode, which I
Yeah.
think is going to precede this one. So
I think we
anyway,
found maybe 5 or 6 more episodes that we need to do.
we did. We always do that, Kevin, And I will tell you this, maybe we can kind of leave this where it is now. I think we got some more follow-up on this one in particular.
For sure.
And I'll leave it to you for your last words, last thoughts on all this. So mixed model, you're basically saying mixed model, don't waste your time. It sucks. It's hard to do. It doesn't work, right? Is that what you're trying to
Right.
tell me?
Yeah, no, it can be hard to do, right? But the process
Right.
is rewarding and you'll
Yes.
improve safety, quality, delivery, and cost. And if you think about how I can do it and not how I can't do it, your team will come up with the ways to do it. And if you get them engaged, they'll figure it out, right? And the Kaizen tool, the standard work and tack time and redux and setup reduction and quality and all those tools that we know, problem solving, they work. They work in this, and they can drive you to be able to make continuous improvement and take better care of your customers, employees, and shareholders.
And provide security for the company, which is
Exactly.
in turn security for yeah, for the employees. So I guess maybe uh, in the final analysis, in addition to all those benefits you alluded to earlier, probably the biggest benefit is the whole respect for people.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
You know, yeah. So
Yeah, I think that has to be fundamental in everything that we think about.
well, we talk a good game and we make really nice posters, but we don't always act in accordance to what
Yeah,
that means, right? That it truly means, So
it's often
uh,
just a slogan.
actually, I'll leave it with this. Now, I remember Nakao telling me he probably told you the same thing. the number one job of a manufacturing engineer is to make the operator's job easy.
Yeah, yeah,
That's as simple as that.
yeah,
Okay. He
yeah,
hated catalog engineers. He hated engineers who
for sure.
were
Yeah.
on the computer ordering parts and ordering their solutions. Go
Mhm.
make the operator's job easy.
Yeah,
Get your hands dirty and make it easy. Don't spend time in front of a computer. Get out
right.
in the Gempa. But
Yeah,
respect for people, a big deal. Kevin, great job. This was
yeah,
good.
thanks.
Hopefully this is going to raise a lot of questions. So Mark, M-A-R-K, at lean911.com or Kevin.Mathis, Mathis, at leanhorizons.com. Email us with any of your questions, comments, and all that, or what you would like to see also in future episodes from Kevin on mixed model or any other of the different things that we talked about. Remember, all of what we talk about, lean is all one big Venn diagram.
Mhm,
You
mhm,
know, Americans and consulting companies, the consulting industry that we're in, likes to compartmentalize all these different tools because it's a nice way to sell them. But we don't think about it that way. You cannot talk about standard work without talking about visual control, cell design, one-piece flow,
mhm.
and SMED and all that, or mixed model for that matter.
Right.
So we don't look at this as, hey, let's just go implement 5S. Everything we do has 5S attached to it.
Mhm,
We never have one. Lean Horizons have never run a 5S Kaizen,
mhm,
and we would refuse to do so. Okay.
mhm, mhm.
But it all has to benefit standard work and everything around that. So anyway,
Yeah,
Kevin, thanks. We'll see you
yeah,
next
thank
time. I'm sure
you.
we've got a lot more going on,
Well, thank
and we'll
you.
take it from there.
All
Okay.
right, thank you. Yep,
Thanks, Kevin.
good time. Yep,
You
thanks.
bet. Thanks for listening to the Lean 911 podcast. I'll be happy to address your questions or feedback on future episodes. Email me at mark@lean911.com. You can check out our other episodes by visiting our website at lean911.com, our YouTube channel, wherever you listen to podcasts. This is your host, Mark DeLuzio. Thanks for listening.